Oh, dear friends, Lama Jampa Thaye is already in the Gompa, and we know you're enjoying the sun outside and listening to the teachings, but if you'd like to join us here in the shrine, you're very welcome. So that's for the information that Lama Jampa Thaye is already here in the Lakang.
Sanje Chedang Sui Che Jo Nam La Chanjo Bado Dai Ni Cha Dai Gi Jin Soi je pe sunam je rula penche sanje rupa sanje che dan soi che cho nam la chan chu pa do dani cha su ji da ge jin so je pe sunam rula penche sanje rupa sanje che dan soi che cho nam la chan chu pa do dani cha su ji da ge jin so je pe sunam ji rula penche sanje rupa Paden Save Lama Rimbo Dagi Chiwo Peme Dinshu Gardin Jembo Jizunde Kusun Turji Nadu Sadu Saji Buso Soche Metatran Rirabling Jimba De Sanji Shingdu Migda Puayen Rukam Namlajin Chupajo Senje Namche Zambada Loye Jita Chizheng Tumong Degbaye Chichi Kolo Koto. So good morning to everybody. And we continue this morning from where we finished yesterday, just to remind ourselves. We're now studying the part of Control Lodra's text on the Shentong view, which is entitled, What is to be practiced? We already heard before what is to be understood, as it were, the theoretical explanation of the Shentong view. Now, how we can gain realization of that, experience of it, through meditating. So again, to remind ourselves, that was divided into, firstly, preliminary section, which was the general preliminaries for meditating Shentong, which is to meditate on the four seals, or, if we prefer, to meditate on the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, from the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. Then we came to the actual instruction for the meditation session itself. And like all meditation sessions, that's three parts: a specific preliminary, the main meditation itself, and then the concluding stage of the meditation. So the preliminaries, the specific preliminaries, were to take refuge and bodhicitta. And yesterday I firstly explained very briefly the general understanding of why we take refuge and generate bodhicitta at the beginning of any meditation session. And then we went through Control Lodra Thaye's actual presentation of the prayers we should do if we are meditating in this system. And for that he quoted passages from the Lankavatara Sutra for refuge and for bodhicitta. So we finished that yesterday morning. So now we come to the actual instruction for the main practice. And in harmony with how we were introduced to the theory of the view earlier, when it was explained that we should take the teachings of the second turning of the wheel, in short, Shentong Madhyamaka, and thoroughly digest them, and only then can the Shentong view be introduced. So, in harmony with that, two parts, the meditation session is divided, or the main part of the meditation has also two aspects. First, in accord with the Shentong view, and then in accord with the Shentong view. So this is what Control Lodra Thaye says in the text. through settling in the unelaborated, non-conceptual state, in accord with the intermediate wheel, one will come to the transcendence, which is the profound true nature of reality. Well, we'll see what that actually means when we go through the instructions. The main point is that this is, as I just said, the Rangtong meditation. And that is, of course, that comes from the teachings Lord Buddha gave in those sutras, those discourses, which we designate the second turning of the wheel. So here's the actual precise instructions. Controller Drattai says, sit in a comfortable position and cultivate devotion. Well, there's many potential misunderstandings, I think, in the phrase, sit in a comfortable position. So, comfortable position for meditation, for the purposes of meditation. You may want to be in a comfortable position for other purposes. We'll not go into those now, but for meditation, it must be one, of course, which is a blend of being relaxed, but also being alert, being attentive. So, the most common position taught in the Dharma for that is the 7-point position of Vairocana. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, or at least parts of this instruction. Sitting in a legs in Vajra position, if you can, with the soles of the feet on the opposed thighs, or at least sitting cross-legged with a straight back, with the right hand left resting on the left, with the thumbs touching, one's neck slightly tilted forward, one's mouth closed, the tongue touching the palate, one's eyes half open and half closed. If one was meditating shamatha, the gaze would be slightly downwards. If vipassana, slightly upwards. And with this, the position, the winds in the subtle body upon which the mind moves, so to speak, they will become peaceful because they'll gather into the central channel, and that will help us to meditate very naturally. So sit in a comfortable position and cultivate devotion. Devotion here, in a general sense, means the aspiration to realize the teaching, to have this confidence, this faith, this aspiration in the Buddha nature teaching, or in this particular part, in the common Madhyamaka teaching. So, sit in a comfortable position and cultivate devotion. Now, he says, if you have previously arrived at the view through hearing and reflection, simply settle now evenly, yamshak, the Tibetan word, is relaxed, settling, in mindfulness of that view. So the significance of this is, when you studied the theoretical presentation, what is to be understood, if you really got a good understanding of it, such that you dispelled all doubts, all uncertainties, unclarities, you became thoroughly sure that all conditioned phenomena are indeed empty of any intrinsic nature, so there is nothing inner or outer to cling to as having intrinsic nature, then to meditate that, just simply bring it to mind and relax into it. No need for further investigation or analysis. Just rest your mind in that wide open state of being absolutely confident that there is nothing to grasp onto, because nothing has any intrinsic nature whatsoever. Not mind, not body, not inner, not outer. The totality of conditioned phenomena, in other words. If on the other hand, so perhaps you don't have that certainty, just at the moment. If on the other hand, you lack hearing and reflection, remember hearing and reflection, Sam in Tibetan, are the two preceding stages before Gom, wisdom, meditation. So we say hear, reflect, meditate. And the theory teaching was taught for us to hear and reflect upon before we entered into the meditation now. So if on the other hand you lack hearing and reflection, you've not done enough of that to have real confidence in this view of the emptiness of all phenomena, then this is what you can do. So here's some instruction in analytical meditation to bring you to the same point of understanding, but now arrived at through your own experience. So there's, firstly, the first thing to look for, to try to analyze, he says, understand that your own mind is not established from any nature whatsoever, and just realize individual selflessness. What does he mean, individual selflessness? As I mentioned yesterday, we say that in terms of understanding emptiness, the Hinayanis, or the Shravakas, if you like, those who follow the first turn of the wheel, they understand emptiness to an extent, but only as it applies to the individual, to the person. Whereas non-Buddhists would assert that sentient beings, we, persons, do have a true self, something that is core, that never changes, that is autonomous, that is singular. The Shravakas say that's not true, we cannot find it. The individual is empty of a self. So we want to now, in our analysis, come to that certainty, equivalent, first of all, to a level of a Shravaka. So our own mind here means who we think we are, myself, which we identify right now with my mind, the thinker, the one who's experiencing, the one who's seeing. So if there was a truly existent mind, if my mind was truly existent, it must have come into being. It must have been produced. So from what was it produced? Because everything that is a real thing, that we imagine is a real thing, we have to be able to say, here is its source, here is where it comes into existence, and here is where it endures, and here is where it ceases. So what is the cause of my mind? Well, to answer this question, there's only a certain number of possible answers. The first one would be to say, as one might say about anything, it causes itself, it comes from itself. Actually, that's an impossible answer. Because for the mind to cause itself, it means it has to exist before it comes into being. Because there's the mind as the result, the mind produced by itself, but then there's a mind that does the producing. How can it be both of those? It can't be. So the mind cannot produce itself, just like nothing can produce itself. Besides which, if the mind already existed, why would it need to, or if anything already existed, why would it need to produce itself again? And furthermore, if things come from themselves, including in this case my mind, there would never be any change, because things would just reduplicate themselves, reproduce themselves to infinity. So this mind, which I think is myself, truly existent, with a beginning, well, that explanation of its beginning is impossible. So then perhaps I will say, well, yes, the mind doesn't produce itself. It doesn't come from itself. It is produced from something other than itself, something entirely distinct. But that's got many difficulties, such a belief, such an assertion. Because if it was truly the case that, say, phenomenon which we'll label A over there is the cause of phenomenon B over here, and they're entirely different, there's no connection between them at all. It would mean everything arose randomly, without connection. If that were the case, anything could truly be the case of anything else. And therefore, the rice, like as Chandakirti says in Madhyamaka Avatara, if that was the case, that one thing was produced from something entirely different, then darkness would come from flames. But we know that doesn't happen. Light comes from flame, not darkness. Similarly, if one said of mind, oh, the source of my mind is something physical, like, for instance, my mother and father's elements that mingled at conception. But physical elements are utterly different from mind. Mind is formless and consciousness, sentient. It's aware, it experiences. Sperm and ovum, our mother and father's elements, are physical. They don't have any consciousness. They don't experience. So it would be a random, utterly meaningless arising for the mind, which is of one type, from physical elements which are entirely of another. Only that which is sentient can be the source of that which is sentient. So my mind, me, the thinker now, this moment of mind does not come from something other, distinct from mind, like physical elements. So then perhaps I would say, so that is the second alternative, shown to be impossible. Then I might say, well, okay, my mind now, me, the thinker, I arise from a combination of those two sources. From the mind creates itself and is created from something other. That's a nonsensical assertion, because both of those alternatives have been individually shown to be impossible. You don't get a right answer by putting two wrong answers together. So then there's only one fourth possibility. There's no causes, it just happens. This mind now that I is experiencing now, it just happened, that's all. But nothing just happens without causation. Sky flowers don't just materialize in the sky. Even ordinary people would not believe such a thing. Farmers, for instance, don't believe that crops of barley or rice or whatever it is just arise. They know that they have to come from the appropriate causes and conditions. So this mind, which I think is myself, it cannot be found to have any intrinsic nature, any independent existence. Is it nothing at all? No. There's the appearance of mind, but it arises through dependent origination, the gathering of causes and conditions. So it's not a self, as I imagine it to be, an independent, solid, unchanging, self-controlling entity. So, in that way, I see the first point, that there's no such thing as an individual self, as I imagined it to be. So now we can deepen this view, go further in realizing emptiness. In other words, now approach the Mahayana understanding of emptiness, which is not just emptiness of the individual person, but the emptiness of all phenomena. And the way we do that is reminiscent of how the view was explained to us previously. Controller Drattai says, subsequently, meaning after you've cut through your clinging to the idea of the individual self being substantially real, subsequently, by determining that the appearances of both all apparent objects and your own mind are not established as anything other than mere appearance, you'll understand the selflessness of phenomena. In such a way, mind and appearances are inseparable like waves and water. Well, in a sense, we already had guidance yesterday in how to realize this. As I pointed out, it's none other than the ultimate bodhicitta meditation from the Lojong, where we begin by realizing that although I believe and imagine that the so-called objects, walls, sun, bodies, whatever is arising, or whatever is heard, I imagine that they're truly external objects, and my mind is, as it were, going out and taking hold of them, but they're not. They're no more externally real than images in a dream. And having realized that, I then look into the mind looking into mind, by asking those questions like, what is its shape? What is its color? How does it arise? How does it endure? How does it cease? Is it in my body? Is it outside of my body? In other words, does it have a location? To see that it doesn't, the mind, which is the perceiver, no more exists as true than the objects, the appearances which are perceived by the mind. So I cut through that dualistic clinging to outer and inner. I thoroughly exhaust it by, as it were, simply looking for it. Looking to see are there external objects, then looking to see if there's any mind here which is the perceiver. Until I realize that they're both empty. They're both empty of any intrinsic nature. No solid objects, no solid perceiver. So in such a way, mind and its appearances are inseparable like waves and water. Rather, when one experiences the world, it is not that there's a mind on one side and the world on the other. The mind on one side, objects on the other. So why are there different appearances arising? Just like the reason there are different waves appearing from the ocean. Because there are currents within the ocean, they stir up the appearance of the waves. But if one asks, what is the substance of the waves? One would, of course, realize it's just water. It's just the ocean water. momentarily taking on this shape, in the next moment taking another shape, all depending on what currents are pushing the movement of the water. Similarly, depending on what imprints are coming to ripen in the mind, different appearances manifest, but they're no more than the mind. They're nothing other than the mind. Just like however big or small the waves are, their substance is the ocean water itself. So control continues. When you have developed the understanding that subject and object are of equal taste here, or equal flavor, we could say, depending on what is rochik, meaning there's nothing distinctive, actually. The appearances are no more than the mind. They have no different quality, no different characteristic than the mind itself. It's not like they have to be joined together. They're naturally together in that the waves have never been anything other than the ocean, so appearances have never been other than the mind. So when you've developed that through your looking, as we could call it, this investigation or this looking into appearances and mind in this way, when you develop that understanding, do not waver towards the outer, do not withdraw inwardly, and do not cling to the in-between. He means so there's no need now, because you've found there's nothing there to cling to, no need to, as it were, grasp at the outer, but also at the same time, no need to withdraw to the inner, because this teaching is not saying your own mind is real. Yes, there's no external world, but you, the thinker, are real, because you, the thinker, you, the subject, cannot be any more real than the objects. And the objects aren't truly real, aren't truly existent. So it's not that in this meditation we're rejecting appearances to turn inside in some kind of withdrawal or some kind of retreat, because this would simply be another form of clinging, reinforcing the idea of self. So do not be biased towards the outer, as the person who is, dependent on objects might be, but do not be dependent on the inner. Don't cling to that. And don't cling to the in-between. Don't place your mind anywhere, in other words. All those were hang-ups. All those were knots in your way of experiencing the world. You've untied the knots now through the looking. So don't place your mind anywhere. Control says, without straying into indifference, settle in a sky-like openness. He means this letting go of those knots, this seeing in fact there's no knots at all to be even caught up in, is not to be confused with dullness or apathy, as if everything's, you just simply don't care anymore. There's nothing interesting, nothing exciting, so it's like the world has become dull for you. Not at all. It should be, in fact, the exact opposite. So your mind should, he says, leave your mind in a sky-like openness. And the thing about the sky, or space, is it can contain anything. It depended on the conditions, it can reflect so many different, limitless colors. Sometimes the sky appears pale blue, sometimes dark blue, sometimes it's clouded over, sometimes it's clear. There are the planets with the sun and the moon are within it, the planets are within it. It is absolutely, as it were, vivid and clear, and allows all appearances to be vivid and clear. So that is where I'm as you like, I said we shouldn't place our mind in any position, but place your mind in that vast openness of the sky, which allows everything to arise in its unique particularity. The planets appear undistorted. The stars appear undistorted in the sky, because the sky has no bias, no aim in any direction. Not even anything by which you can say it's really that color or really that extent, because it's boundless in extent and absolutely colorless in reality. So our mind should be in this way just like space, just like as boundless as space, as unbiased, as undistorted as space, as open as space. Now he says, whatever appearances of the sixfold collection arise are emptiness itself. There is nothing to abandon or accept, nothing to hope or fear, to block or to establish. So the sixfold collection, he simply means the senses. Eye, visual objects, ear, sounds, tongue, taste, etc., etc. So you see, normally when we practice meditation, when we begin to meditate, we feel in a way that the objects of the senses are a distraction, and therefore we gather the mind onto a single point in shamatha. Bring the mind to the single point by focusing on a Buddha image or a blue flower or on the flow and counting of the breath, because our mind is all over the place chasing after these objects. Here's a sound, there's an object, a visual object, etc., etc. Here's a thought, here my intellect chases it, and so on. But when you've contemplated the view in this way, realizing there's nothing to grasp at, outer or inner, and you leave your mind just as vast and open as space, then whatever arises, and of course appearances arise, sense experiences arise, through the flow of dependent origination, you don't have anything to fear from them, because there's nothing to get caught up in. They're not objects you can grasp at. They're just the play of mind. So they don't disturb the nature of mind. They don't divide the nature of mind. So pleasant objects, ugly objects, indifferent objects, pleasing sounds, unpleasant sounds, we can allow them to arise and pass away without interfering with them. Because if we have this understanding of space-like emptiness and confidence in resting in it, we cannot lose that. We cannot lose that no matter what appearances arise. So that's why he says, there's nothing to abandon or accept. Accept means to grasp and say, I like this. Abandon means to say, I don't like this, I want this to be gone. That's how one's mind normally works. But now, because everything is no more than the mind, and the mind is no more than the sky-like openness, such preferences are not necessary, don't have to happen. Similarly, there's nothing to hope or fear. It means, you see, when we're still subject to dualistic perceptions, then we fear things, we fear confusion, and we hope for clarity. So we fear some things and hope for other things. Again, it's our preferences. But here there's nothing to fear. No object can bewitch me, because I realize its essential emptiness. It's nothing more than the play of mind. But no object actually to hope for. So like for instance, the meditator, his or her preferences are, he doesn't like a bad meditation when there are many thoughts, and he likes a good meditation where there are not many thoughts. He has those preferences. But actually, that's still being caught up in dualism, in duality. So there's nothing, we do not need to wish for a good meditation or fear a bad meditation, because actually there's no such thing. Thoughts arise, they're empty. Stillness arises, it's empty. To block or to establish, again the same thing, to try to bring about an end to certain things happening in mind, or to create certain things happen in mind. But you don't need to do that, because whatever manifests is no more than emptiness in the sky-like mind. Therefore, when moving thoughts occur, which the beginner meditator, he or she tries to control them, the moving thoughts, and bring the mind back to the object, because they hope to experience the stillness, the nyepa, the stillness in between moving thoughts. So the initial meditator has this big distinction between stillness and moving thoughts. But for the meditator who can rest in the sky-like openness, it doesn't work out like that. That's not the way he or she relates to moving thoughts. As he says here, whenever moving thoughts arise or occur, maintain their self-pacification and self-liberation without fabricating anything at all. Whenever thoughts arise in the meditation, if immediately you meet them with that understanding, they're nothing more than the mind, and therefore they're nothing more than empty, why should you need to fear them or change them? Because they pacify themselves as they arise. Meaning, if you take them as solid, if you think they're different from the mind, if you think they're different from emptiness, yes, you'll get caught up in a chain of conceptualization. I like this, I don't like that, and this chain of thoughts will proliferate, leading to disturbing emotions, leading to karma, leading to accumulation of actions. But if it doesn't go like that, you meet them with the realization, the wave is just the water, the moving thought is still the mind, nothing other than the mind, then that potential agitation never arises. The thought, as he says here, arises, and in its arising pacifies itself and liberates itself. You don't need to do anything to liberate it. You just need to realize its emptiness. As the great Sokchen Master Patramjay says, with this view, whatever thoughts arise, they're like a line drawn on water. The thing about a line drawn on water is, as soon as you are doing it, as soon as the line is forming, it's dissolving. It goes no further than that, ever. It cannot possibly. It self-liberates. In its very arising, it is liberated. So we're saying, Gangsha Arandro, whatever arises is naturally or self-liberated. So the beginner meditator thinks when thoughts arise, I need to remove them. I need to come back to the object. But if you have this confidence of the wide open mind, that's not at all appropriate, not at all necessary. No sooner is the thought arising than it's liberated, and you do nothing. You don't apply any antidote. You don't even have to apply the antidote of dissolving it into emptiness, because it dissolves as it arises, just like the wave. The ocean doesn't need to do anything to the wave, to, as it were, talk it into realizing it is still the ocean. The wave is nothing more than the ocean. So no matter how many waves arise, nothing more than the ocean. Similar with moving thoughts. No matter how many moving thoughts arise in a meditation, if you have this confidence of this view, then they self-pacify and self-liberate without fabricating anything at all. Fabricating means artificially bringing something about. You see, that is the trouble with our meditation. Generally, it's very fabricated. We have an idea of where we want to go to, an idea of what we want to achieve, and so we try techniques to do that, to bring that about, to bring about stillness, to bring about clarity, bring about insight, and so on. But there's no need for any of that. In fact, they pile up confusion upon confusion. So that's why, as in Mahamudra, we say, Machunume, uncontrived naturalness is the, as it were, non-method, which is the method, leaving the mind completely alone. So thoughts arise and pass away by themselves. So here in this meditation on this view, it's the same. So Contra says, so therefore, search for mind and determine that it is primordially unelaborated and self-liberated in accord with the stages of examining the settled mind set out in the textual guides. So in a way, this is what we've been doing. The textual guides means the meditation instructions derived from the sutras and from the teachings of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. There we're taught to look for the mind. When the mind is settled, when it's no longer divided in all directions by wandering emotions and wandering thoughts, when the mind is settled, then it says, look for the nature of mind by asking these questions. What is its color? What is its shape? What is its location? How does it arise? How does it endure? How does it cease? And by looking, we'll find there's nothing to find. We'll find there's no mind whatsoever which exists as any kind of entity. And all the appearances, of course, are themselves no more than that mind. So when we discover the no mind, the mind which is no mind, then whenever we practice, and even in between practices, whatever arises is unelaborated from the very beginning, and therefore liberates itself. Apart from that, Contra continues, apart from that one recognition, that single recognition of the unelaborated true nature of mind, there is no object of meditation. Meaning, if you've discovered this, that mind is beyond all objectification, cannot be found in any way, any shape, any form, any location, any time, any duration. If you know that, then there's nothing else to discover. That is a single point for your meditation. It's like nothing more to do at this point. So when you do sit, you have no objects to place the mind on. It's like the great master Shabarapa says in one of the Mahamudra Dohas, he says, in the ancient times, the ships used to carry a crow, and to determine whether they were near land, they would let the crow go. It was tied up, and they'd let it go, and it would wander around, and if there was no land, they would realize that because the crow would come back and settle on the mast of the plane. So Shabarapa says, similarly for meditation, let the mind settle by itself. It will realize, because it realizes there's nothing to grasp onto, nothing to aim at, nothing to look for, nothing to achieve. This is the way it is with mind. If we realize this essential point, that the mind is unelaborated. Control Dosai says, rely upon mindfulness of the unelaborated. This is taught as uncontrived nowness and the natural state of whatever arises. So he means that this realization that we come to through this system, that the mind is unelaborated, and therefore it is not an object that we meditate on in meditation. In fact, there's no object for us to meditate on. This is known also, for instance, in the Kagyu Mahamudra teaching as uncontrived nowness, where we say in Kagyu Mahamudra, don't place your mind on the past, don't anticipate the future, and with regard to the present moment, remain without clinging or fixation. So this is the famous Kagyu Mahamudra basic instruction. Just rest the mind in uncontrived. Uncontrived here means without any artifice, without any attempts, without any trying to manufacture meditation. Don't get caught up in trying to do anything to your mind. To do something to your mind would mean you don't have the confidence that the mind is naturally free, is naturally unelaborated, is naturally like space. If you don't have that confidence, of course you'll identify your mind with temporary thoughts and think, I could improve this, I need to improve it. The mind is now samsaric, I need to make it nirvanic, so to speak. So I must do this. I must take that away from mind and add that to mind. Add some shamatha and vipassana to mind, improve it to the point of enlightenment. But you've no need to do that. That would just be to add something that would obscure mind's actual primordial purity. So the meditation is once again not adding anything or taking anything away from the mind. And in terms of the 3 times, past, present, and future, resting in uncontrived nowness. Not clinging to the present moment as if an object you can take hold of, but just letting your mind be thoroughly one with whatever arises at this present moment. And it's also called, this meditation is also called, the natural state of whatever arises, meaning it doesn't matter. Whatever sounds, whatever thoughts, whatever appearances, whatever smells, nothing to fear from them. They are, as we've said already, nothing more than the mind. So I have nothing to lose from whatever arises, because it's no sooner arising than it's liberating itself, so to speak. So in Mahamudra Doha of Tilopa that he gave to Naropa by the bank of the Ganges, he says, cut the 6 senses and let them go free. Nothing to fear from such experience. So Control continues, without clinging to one's own mind. Why? Because there's nothing to cling to. It's without clinging to one's own mind, luminous and empty. The actual situation of mind is it is this union, this coincidence, this natural union of luminosity, that is clarity, the basis of all appearances, and emptiness. At the same time as it's the basis of all appearances, it's without any intrinsic nature. It's not a thing, it's not a substance. It can't be found, it cannot be grasped. And that's why it can reflect all appearances. If the mind had its own intrinsic nature, then it couldn't reflect anything beyond itself. But it can reflect everything because it's, so to speak, odorless, colorless, tasteless. Just like space, with no edge, no center, nothing by which you could take hold of it. But it's not nothingness, it's not blankness, it's luminous, it's clear, and therefore all appearances manifest. So that mind that is the true nature of our mind, in fact. So you cannot cling on to it. Just rest in that. And as he says, whether happiness or sadness, stillness or movement arise, simply maintain, without fabrication, just that nowness and the natural state of whatever arises. So, what are happiness and sadness to the mind which is luminous and empty, like space? There, without any substance and reality. If we become involved in likes and dislikes, then of course we feel we're having the experience of happiness from the objects we've decided to categorize as pleasant, and we feel we're having sadness from the objects we've categorized as ugly. But in fact, there aren't any real objects there. They're just the manifestation of mind. So there's nothing real in reacting with happiness and pleasure to some things and sadness with others. So if happiness and sadness arise in our meditation, when we're resting in the nature of mind, we should just think, this is just the fruit of past karma. These experiences now have nothing in them to grasp at. So I can allow them to arise. I don't need to grasp the happy experiences and reject the sad experiences. They're naturally empty, even as they manifest. And this way we don't get caught up in them. And stillness and movement, nyepa and jura, as I said, the initial meditator places great emphasis on this. He or she is so concerned, understandably, to reduce the agitation of mind, that in a kind of implicit way, they think stillness is to be preferred to movement. The gap or space between thoughts is the real meditation, and the moving thought is the not meditation. But from the point of view of Rigpa, from the point of view of the primordial awareness of mind, or put another way, from the point of view of mind's nature being luminous and emptiness, stillness or movement makes no difference. It's just the mind. It's just the mind. It's like with the waves, to go back to that again. The wave is we see. So that's like the moving thought. The trough between waves, when the wave sinks back into the ocean, and before the next moment of a wave arises, there's the trough, the gap between waves. But the trough between waves is no more ocean than the wave itself. So whether it's a wave or between waves, mind has not lost its essential nature of luminosity and emptiness. So we don't, with this confidence of this view, we do not discriminate between moving thoughts and stillness. It's like from the point of view of the fingers seem to be qualitatively different from each other. But from the point of view of the palm, the fingers are no more than the palm, no more than that. Similarly, from the point of view of Rigpa, from the point of view of the luminous and empty mind, whether it's stillness or moving thought, it's still both just a manifestation of mind. That is all. So, simply maintain, as he says, without fabrication, again, without any attempt to improve something or remove something, as if I've got too many thoughts, I must remove them, or I've got too many thoughts of sadness, I must make them happy thoughts, or I've got too many moving thoughts, I must replace them by stillness. Forget all such techniques of modifying your mind. Leave the mind completely natural. without fabrication, just remain in that nowness and the natural state of whatever arises. Do not be bound, Controller Thaye says, by that which is to be abandoned, or for striving for its antidote. It's the continuation of the same point. We destroy our meditation, we ruin our meditation by this kind of dualism of thinking there's something to be removed from my mind, and this is what how I should remove it and what I should replace it with. But that is just nonsensical of thinking there's something to be removed in the sky and this is what I should replace it with. How can the sky have anything defective to be removed from it? It's boundless, without any characteristic whatsoever. So there's nothing inferior or faulty in the sky. And there's nothing that one can add to the sky which would improve it. So it is the same with the mind itself. Once you realize it's unelaborated, like the sky. So, as we say, nothing to add, nothing to take away. Nothing to add to mind, because it doesn't lack anything, it's primordially empty. Nothing to take away, it's got no faults, because it's primordially empty. Resting in the non-meditation of unsupported awareness, the ultimate calm abiding in insight, or shamatha and vipassana, of the Mahayana arises. Unsupported awareness means the mind relaxed without the support of any object. In beginner meditation, the mind, the awareness, focuses on an object, as I mentioned, like the blue flower or the Buddha image or the flowing and counting of the breath. But when we have confidence in this view, there's no need for that. So our awareness is, so to speak, unsupported. And this is, once again, the meditation that is non-meditation, because it doesn't have any agenda or any direction. It doesn't think there's anything to be gained by altering or adjusting the mind in any way. So out of that will come all the qualities, if one can rest in that way, all the qualities that are described as shamatha, calm abiding, and vipassana, insight, will naturally arise. In other words, we won't need to perform all the procedures of shamatha and vipassana, so the 9 stages of settling the mind, the various investigations of vipassana. We won't need them at this time, when we can simply rest in the empty mind itself. Now, for a beginner, perhaps it's too difficult to meditate this non-meditation, to meditate without support. So in that case, one should use the supports that are taught in the general meditation instructions. But once one gains confidence in this view, then one should let those structured supports go and just settle in openness. At this point, Controller Thaye says, at this point, whatever impressions of meditative experience or qualities of the path occur, the profound point is to recognize one's own nature without desire or attachment. So it's like he's saying that, of course, through the strength of your meditation, then there may be certain experiences that arise. For instance, in the path of meditation, they're the three experiences, which in the Kagyu tradition are called the three experiences where one may go astray. These experiences of Dewa, Selva, Mitokpa. Dewa means bliss, Selva means clarity, Mitokpa means non-conceptualization. They're byproducts of our meditation. We could call them signs that our practice is, or evidence that our practice is warming up. But they're not realization. They're just nyam, just experiences. Immature meditators often mistake these things for something definitive, as if they're already on the noble bodhisattva levels, on the irreversible levels, the irreversible path to Buddhahood. But no, they're just byproducts of our practice gently strengthening. So if such experiences arise, like feelings of great bliss in one's body or mind, or feelings of great clarity, or being able to rest without conceptualization for quite long periods, one should not make anything of them. One should not cling to them and think, this is real sign now of realization, or I need to keep in this state at all times, I need to make sure that I always have this experience. If you have those kind of reactions to such temporary small signs, then you will obstruct them turning into the real signs of realization. The nyam will never become a tok, to use the Tibetan terms. The experience will never become a realization if you cling to them. And again, if you have experiences that seem like qualities of the path, such as, for instance, expanded perceptions and so on, don't make anything of them, don't cling to them, because otherwise you'll bias and distort your practice, so that every time you practice you will try to achieve that same little glimpse that you had. Instead, just remain all the time in this wide openness of mind. As he says, the profound point is to recognize one's own nature without desire or attachment. Whereas attachment to these experiences will derail you. Like it said, attachment to these meditation experiences, if it becomes a fixation during your life, at the best this will lead to rebirth in different realms at the time of death. But will not make an advance on the Dharma path. In fact, generally one could say, mostly we have a tendency to overrate our meditation experiences. Probably because we're so unused to meditation experiences that when they do arise, we're so overjoyed by them that we mistake them for something bigger than they are. Then you might worry, if I don't really look at my meditation experiences, I might miss the point that I've reached the noble levels. Believe me, you will not miss the point. If you reach the path of vision, the first noble level, the evidence that you've reached the first noble level is explained by Chandrakirti in Madhyamaka Thaye, explained in the Bodhisattva Bhumi Sutra, and explained in the Tantras. At the first noble level, the joyful one, third of the five paths, the path of vision, you'll be able to multiply your body 100-fold and simultaneously go to receive teachings from 100 Buddhas in 100 Buddha fields. That is your homework for tonight. But I've had an experience where I can remain in bliss for 1 hour or 2 hours. Or my mind feels so clear and so sharp. Sure, maybe that's true, but it is just a small nyam, a small experience. Don't overrate it. And if you're practicing this system, just keep, as it were, mind on the main point, to realize your own nature. And at this point, that is the natural emptiness of mind transcending all extremes. So Contra says, you can sum that up in this way. One should recite, it's like a kind of slogan to train by for this. The basis is emptiness, the path is without signs, the fruit is without aspiration. So it's like, it is always to cut, in a way, to cut through any of our tendencies to overcomplicate and to grasp at what might arise. So the basis, the nature of all conditioned phenomena, the nature of my body and mind, the nature of subject and object, never moves away from emptiness. It's it, just like space, just like sky. So nothing to add, nothing to take away from that. So the path, if what I'm trying to realize is that basis, then no signs that arise on the path are of any consequence whatsoever, actually, because they themselves cannot go beyond emptiness. And so the fruit, if I'm thinking I need to get to a fruit, like now I'm just an ordinary being, I want to get to Buddhahood, even that is a mistake. Thinking of Buddhahood as an object to be taken hold of. And if I do this, that, and the other, or I move this and that, I will get to it in the future. No. That's not the way at all. So, basis is emptiness, path is without signs, and no need to hope for the fruit, no need to hope for the result. Because if you get caught up in hoping for the result, you'll be continuously agitated, piling agitation upon agitation. In a way, making your experience more and more artificial. You have in your mind an idea of what you're aiming at, and therefore, as it were, tailor your experience to that. Oh, the fruit would be like this. The goal I'm aiming at is like this. So therefore, in my meditation, I need more of this ingredient, special ingredient X, and less of that ingredient. So it's like you become a mechanic fiddling with your mind to make it clearer, more this and more the other. No mechanic can take hold of emptiness. No mechanic can do anything to emptiness. Mechanics need to relax in natural emptiness. So this is the point of this teaching, meditation according to the second turning of the wheel. So I think we could pause here. We're making some progress. But perhaps there are some questions. But firstly, I want to say, actually, before, if there are any questions, when a teaching is given from a text, the Lama who is giving the teaching, who has, of course, the transmission, he or she is, in a way, just opening the door to that particular teaching. And so those who hear it, they should think, or they can think if they wish to, afterwards I really master this teaching. And that means I really study it, really reflect on it, analyze it, memorize the key points, and then put it into practice. So that's why we have the text, so that you can carry the teaching away with you. If you've also made notes as well, you carry those away with you. And then you will do your work. It's like the full thing only happens, the 10% of the thing, of the giving the teaching, happens at the time of the giving by the Lama. 90% happens when the students go away and work with the teachings. And you've not worked with the teachings until you've really studied them again and again. You've exhausted all your misunderstandings, you've clarified the correct way of understanding, and you can hear, reflect, and even meditate upon it. So that is why we make available the texts and so on for you to do your work subsequently if you're moved to do so by the teaching. And that way we become masters of the teaching. You see, in a way, it's very generous. The Buddha invites us all to become masters of the teaching by sharing the teaching. So the lineages continue that spirit of generosity. The lamas who themselves have experienced the generosity of their teachers, their masters, then share it with us so we can also become masters ourselves. So that is what the point of giving teachings like this is, to allow for you also to master this, for instance, in this case, this Shentong view. So that is why, unless you have extraordinary memory, which is you may, but if you don't have extraordinary memory, then the text is a very valuable support for that, for your subsequent work with the teachings. There's no other, one would say, how do you learn the Dharma? Well, for the general Dharma, you learn it through the text being taught to you. For the Vajrayana, you learn it through receiving the initiations and then practicing the sadhanas from those initiations. That's it. There's nothing else. That is where the generosity is exercised by the lamas. So I just wanted to say that, to make that point. If the disciples take the teachings and study them, properly master them, then the teachings will continue. So that I've clarified. So if there's any other things I can clarify before lunch, of course I'm never sure I can clarify, but see what the questions are, if there are indeed any questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Now what you just described, so this meditation according to the second turning of the wheel, I'm not an expert of Mahamudra, but it sounds very similar to what we are given when we are given Mahamudra instructions.
Of course.
So what will be the difference then between Mahamudra instruction and that? And well, the third turning, I suppose we'll see tomorrow, but yeah, at least with Mahamudra.
Some of it, yes. Yes, that is a really good point. So two things that I should say about that. Of course, for control, Lord Thaye, this is his special intention, this is his special approach to this, and he wants to say that even the Rangtong can be presented in a way that is in harmony with Mahamudra and Trekchö in Dzogchen, because there's also no distinction between this teaching and Trekchö in Dzogchen. What will be taught after this is like making this clear that this emptiness is the Buddha nature. But already, yes, his presentation is very reminiscent. I mean, he made that explicit by saying, we can call this uncontrived nowness, which is very typical Mahamudra terminology. Now, another master presenting the second turn of the wheel teachings, such as Tsongkhapa, for instance, it wouldn't sound like this at all. So this is very definitely, one has to understand Control Lord Thaye's take on this. Okay.
You said that we should allow the thoughts and feelings to manifest, but don't let them to grasp us, to possess us. Yeah, and how to do it? Can you illustrate it through some examples how to do such things?
Well, the first thing to make sure everybody understood is a real beginner in meditation doesn't have the power to do this. That is really very necessary to say. A beginner meditator should probably just practice the normal procedures of shamatha. That is to say, focus the mind on an object, bring the mind back to the object, go through the 9 stages of settling, and gain some of the qualities of relaxation and focus and stability through that. But the instructions being given here are for somebody who has strong experience already of meditation and then can meditate on the natural emptiness of phenomena and has the confidence that phenomena are empty, both objects and subject. Then, at that point, for him or her, they can allow whatever arises to appear in a way that a beginning meditator cannot yet. So one has to have experience and learning, experience and confidence for this practice to be possible. Now one might say, do you want to translate that first? Oh, sorry, yes. Okay, yes, I understand. We've got our friends in the spacecraft upstairs. Hi. You're not aliens, are you? Okay. Okay, so, I forgot what I was going to say entirely. Yes. Okay, so one might then make a second question, because I've just said this, which is, if you're implying that most people can't yet do this because their shamatha, etc., their basic Dhamma practice is not yet strong enough, why bother explaining this teaching to us? Good question. Well, because that is the way the Dhamma is generally taught, especially to a crowd. In the crowd of people, there'll be people at different levels of experience. And so for some, the teaching will be immediately applicable. For others, it will be merely an inspiration to start on the stages of practice that will lead to them being at the point where they can use that teaching. And also, you see, so if they're talking with their own Lama, quite likely the Lama would just say to them, because he'd be able to judge what their level is, he would just say, for now you do this, just this point. But when a teaching is given to an assembly, as there are different levels of people, and as the teaching has to be given in its entire, well, as much of it as possible, then for some people everything will be relevant immediately. For some only a small bit will be relevant. But even for those present who are not yet able to use all the teaching, it's good for them to know that such teachings exist. Because one of the problems, particularly in Western Dharma circles, is people have very narrow-minded ideas of what the Dharma is and very small ideas of what the Dharma is. Because they're just given very small, simplified instructions, often, not always, but often, and then they will think this is the entirety of Dharma, and therefore they will never be able to make progress. The great master Zapata Rinpoche said that, in fact, there's the danger of being a frog in the well. And what he means is that there was a frog in a well, poor guy, but he didn't know anything else. He was born, I don't know where his mother and father went, but he was born in the well. The well is all he knew. Anyway, one day, he hears a sound, a croaking from up top. He's never been up top, but he hears a croaking. It's another frog. So the frog in the well says, hello, where are you from? Oh, he says, I'm from the ocean. So the frog in the well says, what's that? And the frog outside the well tries to explain it. It says, so the frog in the bottom well says, oh, an ocean, eh? So you mean it must be as big as my well? And the frog in the well, the frog outside says, no, much bigger than that, much, much bigger. So the frog in the well says, you mean like twice as big as my well? He says, no, much bigger. He says, like, you mean like 4 times as big as my well? He says, no, much bigger. So then the frog in the well says, well, really, man, I got to see this. So somehow he climbs out of the well, and with the external frog, he makes a journey to the ocean. But when he sees the ocean, it blows his mind completely. His head shatters into 1,000 pieces. Well, consider the teachings like some used to saying there's an ocean outside of your well. That is why it's good to hear sometimes, from time to time, very extensive teachings, because they make us realize where we're at in what we've got and the practicing so far, and how much more there is and how much richer the Dharma is. But we're still at the bottom of the well, so step by step we climb from where we are. We don't think we're already outside of the well, but we just gently climb up. So it's like that.
Thank you. I don't really know how to ask this. Maybe I could start with saying, what is the purpose of the teachings we get here at Kibi? And what I mean with that is that I really want to finish the teachings that we get. And unless you speed talk tomorrow, it's quite obvious that we cannot get through the last chapters. So my question is, what is your advice? Because last year it was Lojong, and you didn't finish the teachings. No offense to you, of course. No, not at all.
None taken.
Good. But I mean, how do we get the rest of the teachings? What is your advice?
Well, from my side, I just turn up. It's just I'm asked to come, and I'm given a topic. They suggest a topic, so I try. I try my best. But yes, you're right. It's not being completed. I mean, I do teach in many places, I must say. So, like, if you come to Mexico in the autumn, I'm finishing the second part of the Lojong. That's true. The Continent is Lojong in Mexico. In France, this summer in autumn, I'm teaching the whole of Continent Rinpoche's. Not autumn, it's August, yeah. After I've been in Dagpo, I'm teaching. So I'm trying to say, I do teach these things in other parts of the world, and I'm sure the same with other teachers, that they teach what they teach. I mean, of course, with His Holiness, we're all undergoing a long multi-year transmission of the Bodhicitta, but everything is perfect with His Holiness. If he does just one verse, it's fantastic. But for the more ordinary teachers among us, we try to give them. But just here in Kibi, it's just not possible in the time to finish. I regret that. Although I do promise that tomorrow we'll say a bit about the third turning of the wheel view. We will definitely do that. Okay.
So like, I was just wondering, because even you and Rinpoche mentioned it and emphasized it, that in order to make any progress or reach enlightenment, one needs to understand the Madhyamaka, the emptiness of basically all things. And on the other hand, we hear stories like one reaching realization by meditating on a dog's tooth. So there seems to be a contradiction between the two. And obviously this is, the letter I mentioned is just a story, but I guess a story told with an intention. So like, not without, not, so like, could you elaborate on this?
Sure, it's a good question. Actually, the dog's tooth is rather that this manifested relics to the person with devotion. So enlightenment wasn't gained. But yes, it said, for instance, the great Master Garab Dorje, the first human holder of the Dzogchen lineage, he achieved Buddhahood when Vajrapani gave him just one line of transmission. But then it's always said about Garab Dorje, such masters are as rare as stars seen in the daytime. The rest of us, apart from such people as Garab Dorje, are rimjipas, meaning need a gradual way, step-by-step approach. So theoretically, there's a Garab Dorje. Practically speaking, they're extremely rare, and it's safer to assume we're rimjipas. But then again, also, to talk about such stories, one should say, for instance, in the stories of the Siddhas in India, it is said, when Tilopa slapped Naropa on the face with a sandal, then at that time full realization arose in him. But that's discounting the fact that for many, many years he studied in monastery, in Nalanda Monastic University. He accumulated a lot of Vajrayana practice to come to the point. So it looks like an instantaneous sudden enlightenment arises in Naropa's mind, but all the conditions have been created by hearing, thinking, meditating, accumulating merit, purifying, and so on and so forth. So what can often look like an instantaneous realization, it's not like that, really, when you actually study the case. And so generally speaking, I could say, the advice to follow the practice in that kind of formal way, to hear, think, and meditate, is safest for most of us. But of course, the Buddha nature exists in all beings, so it is possible that just one word of instruction would reveal it to the person with the right karmic conditions. But they are, like I said, about Garab Dorje, as rare as stars seen in the daytime.
Thank you. So, having grabbed the mic, I would like to ask a second question.
Okay.
We were talking about the mind extensively, and also we know that we are talking about our mind that is being reborn and that accumulates karma and so on. So, like, could you explain what our mind is within the framework of the mind?
Of what mind? The framework of what?
So, like, what our mind is that gets reborn within the framework of the mind that is vast as space and experience is of all.
There's no one big mind which everybody is part of. That is not. That's not a Buddhist teaching, because the individual mind streams which become enlightened, but those individual mind streams, they're empty of any intrinsic nature, yet at the same time they're clear and aware. In other words, they experience. So those streams are propelled forward by karma, and from moment to moment, from life to life. But when the basis for the karma, which is disturbing emotions and ignorance, is removed, those streams experience enlightenment, experience the true nature of mind, which is unconditioned and endowed with all the qualities of wisdom and compassion. In short, those minds then become Buddha. They realize their true nature. That is it.
So they are just streams, basically.
Yes, because if all was one mind, then as soon as Buddha, for instance, became enlightened, we'd all experience it. But I don't know about anybody else, but I'm definitely not enlightened, though Buddha is. So I think one more, then lunch. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Today I was attending outside because of microphone problems. I had to listen via YouTube. That's why I'm just now here.
Oh, don't worry.
But I try to follow your instructions.
Yeah.
And there came up the problem with...
Not my instructions. Control
yes, but through your mouth.
Sure.
What about, there was some pain coming up, mainly due to the meditation posture. Maybe you could...
it's a pain.
Pain in the body because of the meditation posture after a while. And how to cope with that? Is it better than to finish the meditation posture, or would you recommend to kind of work with the pain?
Well, I think this is it's a very good question, very important one for people. It's like a certain degree of discomfort is okay, because one can dissolve that with a little bit of patience and experience. But one should overemphasize combating the pain by just sticking it out, because that produces another tension in the mind and another kind of clinging, as if enlightenment will come the more pain I tolerate. And Buddha himself, in his example from his life, he rejected that, because many of the yogis in his time were thinking that spiritual power will come through experiencing and withstanding great pain. And he realized this, in fact, is another type of clinging, another type of self-clinging, really, because one wants to master the pain, and it becomes a big obsession in the mind. One thinks the more pain I can endure, the more powerful I am. So going back to ordinary meditators like ourselves, we should think, well, probably I can lengthen the amount of time I sit. Maybe if after 10 minutes I've got discomfort, perhaps if I lengthen it to 15, I'll find I can. But one should only increase the time in small bits, and if the discomfort is too much, go and sit on an ordinary chair and continue the meditation in that way. So, a certain amount of pain is tolerable. Beyond that, you've lost the meditation, in fact. Sonam di tanshi zikpane to bene pe donam pam chigana chibala drubai se pe sole droa shu.